New at 7, we are hearing from the president of the Connecticut Education Association this evening about a new education report. Researchers from Harvard, Stanford, and Dartmouth analyzed test scores from the spring of 2022 to the spring of 2023. That's the first academic year following the pandemic. Looking at 8,000 school districts in 30 states, the report compared test scores in reading and math before and after the pandemic. Here's a look at data from the report showing the learning loss during the pandemic. Connecticut was one of the worst states in both reading and math. In math alone, the report says students lost more than 70% of a grade level. Connecticut made some of that up in the year following the pandemic, but we're still not where we need to be. Connecticut Education Association President Kate Diaz says that doesn't surprise her, especially when it comes to math scores, because teachers couldn't look over their students' work in real time.
We saw an absolutely tragic loss of the ability to do that ability to look over a student's shoulder and correct small errors along the way in the learning process. So what was happening during the pandemic was you'd be going through instruction, and then it isn't really until an assessment that you're like, holy cow, wow, okay, we're really struggling here.
She knows what she's talking about. Diaz knows from experience how difficult teaching and learning was during the pandemic. You see, she's not just the CEA president, she's also a math teacher who taught during the pandemic. But while the report shows Connecticut made some progress in math following the pandemic, it didn't in reading scores. In fact, it was one of 10 states that actually lost additional ground in reading. Diaz says the pandemic didn't just mean a loss in learning, but a loss in focus as well.
A lot of what had gone on during the pandemic was sort of this learn at your schedule on your time, right? There was a lot of flexibility in learning that hadn't existed prior to. So when we returned to schools where the structures were a little less flexible, we had students who would literally say things like, well, I don't really want to take that quiz today. And you'd be like, I didn't really ask you if you wanted to take that quiz today. I sort of told you you were. And so we had a little bit of mindset work to be done.
And here's another thing the education report showed: the gap in learning. Connecticut was one of the states where wealthier districts led student recovery and higher poverty districts were left even further behind.
You know, that really speaks to the fact that everybody didn't experience the pandemic the same way, right? If you had an extraordinary amount of wealth, then you really looked and had this experience differently, right? You had the room for tutors, you had the room for additional supports. Maybe your parents were able to be more available to do assistance with learning.
Diaz says it's important to understand that this report is looking at numbers statewide and not individual districts.
You know, we certainly saw in some districts, Greenwich, for example, is back to where they were, right? Like they're back to their high level of achievement, had barely a drop off. But we're seeing also in districts like East Hartford, where they've actually surpassed where they were like in 2016. So, you know, there's an interesting story to be told here about how some districts have really struggled to kind of move those numbers and others haven't.
Diaz adds students in poor areas who are struggling to catch up likely don't have enough resources, and well, that's where state leaders need to step up and step in to find ways to reach those students where they are.
It's why I think the governor and the commissioner have invested in the LEAP program, where they're really looking at how are we going back to families and saying, listen, there's no judgment here. We're just trying to help. What can we do to facilitate bringing your student back?
She adds it's really important to understand this report, while it does paint a picture that Connecticut students are struggling, it's one snapshot in time. It's one factor in a story that is much more complicated.